My name is Eleanor Marsh, and I'm 75 years old. I don't know exactly why I'm recording this. I've started it 3 times already, turned it off twice. Sat here in this chair by the window and just watched the street for a while instead. But I think I need to say this out loud, even if no one ever hears it. Even if it just sits here, in this little machine after I'm gone. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles into a house when you've lived alone long enough. It's not peaceful, it's not unpleasant exactly, it's just present. Like a third thing in the room, something that sits beside you and doesn't leave. I've gotten used to it. What I haven't gotten used to is looking at photographs and not recognizing the life inside them. Not the faces, I know the faces. I mean the life, the feeling that was supposed to be there, the one I was certain I was living at the time. I grew up in a small house in western Pennsylvania. My father worked at a plant that made industrial parts I couldn't name then and can't name now. My mother kept the house the way some women keep promises, carefully, quietly, without being asked. We weren't a family that talked about things, not the real things. We talked about dinner and whether the car needed looking at. We talked around everything that mattered the way you walk around furniture in a dark room, carefully, instinctively, without ever turning on the light. I thought that was just how families worked. I carried that assumption for a very long time. I married at 24. His name was Gerald. Jerry, most people called him. He was gentle and steady, and he laughed easily, which I loved because I didn't laugh easily at all. We built a life the way our parents had built theirs, practically, sensibly. We bought a house in a suburb outside of Pittsburgh. We had 2 children, Daniel first, then 4 years later, Ruth. And for a long time, I believed that was enough, that building the structure of a life was the same as living inside it. I think I confused the two for most of my adult years. Daniel was a serious child, dark eyes, always watching. He had a way of standing slightly apart from things, even as a small boy, at birthday parties, at the neighborhood pool, like he was observing rather than participating. I used to worry about that. I'd say to Jerry, "Do you think he's all right? Do you think he's happy?" And Jerry would say, "He's fine, Ellie. He's just quiet, like you." I didn't hear what Jerry was telling me then. I heard it much later, much too late for it to be useful. Ruth was different, louder, warmer. She filled rooms the way weather fills them. You felt her arrival before you saw her. She had friends constantly, plans constantly, a life that seemed to generate its own energy. I understood Ruth less somehow, which is strange because you'd think the easier child would be the more understood one. But I think I was drawn to Daniel's quiet because I recognized it. And I kept a distance from Ruth's brightness because it asked something of me I wasn't sure I had. I told myself I was giving her space. I think I was protecting myself. The years moved in that way that years do when you're not paying attention to them individually. You're paying attention to the week, to the month, to whether the bills are right and the children are fed and the marriage is holding. And the years just pass through you, like weather through a house with the windows open. You don't notice how much is moved until you feel the chill. Jerry died 11 years ago. Heart attack, quick. The doctor said he likely didn't feel much. I've held on to that. I've held on to it harder than I've held on to almost anything else in my life, the idea that he didn't feel much. Because I wasn't there. I was at the grocery store. I was standing in the cereal aisle looking at boxes when my husband died alone on our kitchen floor. And I've never, not once in 11 years, been able to think about cereal without thinking about that. People were kind afterward. People are always kind afterward. They brought food, they called, they sat with me in the living room and said the things people say, and I nodded and thanked them, and I meant it, I did mean it. But grief, I found, is not a thing that other people can reach. They can stand near it with you, they can hand you things through it, but the grief itself is a room only you can enter. And I entered it, and I stayed in it longer than I told anyone. Daniel came for the funeral, of course. He lived in Seattle by then, had for almost 15 years. We spoke on the phone every few weeks, polite calls, careful calls, the kind you cover the surface of a relationship without ever going underneath it. He stayed for 4 days after Jerry was buried. 4 days, and I remember thinking, this is my son, and I don't know what to say to him. Not because I didn't love him, but because I had never learned how. And at 64, he left on a Tuesday. I stood at the door and watched his rental car back out of the driveway, and I had this feeling, sudden and specific, that I had just missed something. I didn't know what. I told myself it was grief, just grief making everything feel unfinished. But it wasn't only grief. It was the recognition, beginning quietly at the edges, that Daniel and I had spent 4 days together and had not once talked about his father. Not really. Not the way people who have lost someone together are supposed to talk. We'd talked about the logistics, the estate, what to do with Jerry's tools in the garage. We had not talked about what it felt like. And I hadn't asked, and he hadn't offered, and we had both let the silence do what silence does when you leave it alone long enough. It hardens. Ruth called more often than Daniel in the years after Jerry died. She'd check in. She'd come for holidays when she could. She was in Atlanta by then with her husband and 2 girls I adored and didn't see nearly enough. She was warmer than Daniel, easier to be with. But I think now that I never fully let Ruth in either. I received her warmth, I appreciated it, but there's a difference between receiving warmth and letting it actually reach you. I kept a kind of glass between myself and the people who loved me. I thought I was being composed, private, strong. I didn't understand that what I was actually doing was keeping everyone at a distance that felt safe to me and must have felt to them like something else entirely. I'm trying to remember the last time I told Daniel I loved him. I know I felt it, I know I did, but saying it, actually saying the words out loud, plainly, without occasion, I can't locate that memory. I can locate the feelings. I can locate the moments where I stood near him and felt that specific weight of loving your child. But the words, I keep searching and I keep finding quiet, just quiet where the words should have been. A few years after Jerry passed, I started going through old boxes, the kind you accumulate over a marriage, photographs, letters, small objects that meant something once and then got buried under the practical business of living. I found a card Daniel had made me when he was 7 or 8, construction paper, crayon, his handwriting small and careful, the way he was small and careful. It said, "I love you, Mom. You are my favorite person." I sat on the floor of the spare bedroom and held that card for a long time. And I thought, did he know that I knew that? Did I ever let him know that I knew? And I couldn't answer that, even for myself, even in that room alone. I couldn't answer it. I called Daniel that evening. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me about work, about his daughter's school play, about some renovation they were doing to the bathroom. I listened. I asked questions. And at the end, before we hung up, I almost said it. I had it right there, right at the front of my mouth. I found the card you made me. I love you. I've always loved you. I'm sorry I wasn't better at showing you. I almost said all of it. Instead, I said, "All right then, talk soon." And I hung up, and I put the card back in the box. I don't tell this because I want sympathy. I tell it because I think it's the truest thing I know about myself, and I've never said it plainly to anyone. I was a woman who felt things deeply and expressed them poorly, and somehow convinced herself for most of her life that the feeling was enough, that love didn't need to be spoken because it was present, that presence didn't need to be explained because it was obvious. I was wrong about that. I know I was wrong about that. But knowing it now doesn't undo the years of quiet that came before the knowing. Daniel and I are better now than we were. Not fixed. I don't think the word fixed applies to something like this. But better. More honest. A few years ago, he said something to me on the phone, carefully, like he thought about it first. He said, "Mom, I never felt like I knew what you needed from me." And I wanted to say, "I never knew either, Daniel." But I just said, "I think I wasn't very good at asking for things." And there was a pause, and he said, "Yeah." Just, "yeah." And somehow that one small word held more understanding than most of our conversations had in 30 years. Ruth came to visit last spring. She spent a week. We cooked together. We watched old films I'd forgotten I owned. One afternoon she said, "You seem different, Mom, quieter, but different." I told her I'd been thinking a lot. She said, "About what?" And I said, "About time, about how I spent it." She didn't push. Ruth knows when not to push. But she reached over and held my hand for a moment. And I let her. I didn't pull back. I didn't change the subject. I just let her hold my hand, and I looked out the window, and I thought, this is what I kept at a distance for so long, this exact thing.